Hello, and welcome to Middle East Focus, a weekly podcast on regional affairs and U.S. policy produced by the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm Matthew Czekaj, managing editor at MEI. My regular co-host, Alistair Taylor, is away this week. Pope Leo XIV just wrapped up his official first foreign trip as head of the Roman Catholic Church. His tour encompassed Turkey and Lebanon, emphasizing ecumenical dialogue, youth concerns, and in particular, regional peacemaking. This week, we're going to focus on the second leg of the papal visit, as well as discuss the situation in Lebanon itself in more detail. And we've invited the perfect guest to help us parse through the trip's symbolism and significance. What was Pope Leo's message to the Lebanese people, and how was it received? How can spiritual and moral authority best be used to help break secular diplomatic logjams and resolve international conflicts? Where is post-war Lebanon headed, and will the Pope's visit have any lasting impact on its trajectory? To explore all of these questions and more, I'm joined by MEI Senior Fellow, Dr. Fadi Nicholas Nassar. Nick is a Lebanon expert based in Beirut, and his work additionally focuses on humanitarian and relief interventions in fragile and conflict settings, democratization, U.S. foreign policy, and Middle Eastern politics. Nick is the author of the 2024 book, UN Mediators in Syria, The Challenges and Responsibilities of Conflict Resolution. Nick, welcome back to Middle East Focus. It's great to be able to speak with you.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Pope Leo was in Lebanon between November 30th and December 2nd, and you went out yourself to join the crowds to see the Pope. Where did you see him, and what was the mood like around you?
Yeah, let me set the picture for your audience. I know this is a podcast, so I'll try.
So lots of hand-waving is expected.
I'll try my best. I saw him on the last day when he gave a public mass early in the morning. I walked down, sat with, there was an estimated around 150,000 people there. And I want to take some time to give you the mood when I entered versus when I left. I was watching the trip as an analyst, as, my job as a senior fellow. And I was struck for a long time by the disconnect between this message of the Pope of peace with the looming threat of war that is hanging over my head, over the head of the country, struck between the curated images we saw from the Lebanese government that was trying to really center on a narrative that is familiar for many Lebanese, of that Lebanon is a message of hope, which, for the Catholic audience is a drawback to Pope John Paul II when he came to Lebanon and really once again tried to show the Vatican's emphasis on Lebanon being a message. It's something greater. And of it giving confidence to the international community, to the world, that Lebanon matters. And so here I am, long story short, quite jaded and feeling, how can I be talking about peace and hearing this message of peace? Well, in a very candid way, I'm thinking, what will happen at the end of December? Are the rumors true? Is there another round of military escalation? So there was this tension. And then I went, to the Mass. I said, I have to go. This is a historic moment. I have to see it for my eyes. And I was surrounded by a lot of people, ordinary people, not part of the VIP. I was way, way in the back. People who had stood there for hours, walked to join the Mass. And you can't help but overhear the conversations. And so many people who stood there in the cold. And then there's this moment when the Pope-mobile passes by you. And it struck me, the Pope went out of his way to make sure he passed at every corner, to look you in the eye, to see you, to wave at you. And in that moment, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'd like to believe we locked eyes, that he smiled at me. And I don't know how to express to you and to your audience that for a second I saw a scene. It's not just me. All the people around me suddenly felt seen. And it struck me that Lebanon is a country where hundreds and thousands of people have not been seen. They have not been seen by this new leadership. They have not been seen as much as one could hope they would have been by the international community. And what the Pope's visit did, to answer your question, is send a message to the Lebanese that we see you. And if you'll allow me, I want to make that very clear through two ways. It was not through the curated, you know, lovely images that we saw by the government, that, okay, that is its effort to curate this image of this message of coexistence. But it was the inclusion of two stops of the Pope. One being at Deir es-Salib, which is a psychiatric institution in Lebanon. And what really resonated with the Lebanese was, that is run by sisters at the moment, is the speech made by, the head nun, who was overwhelmed with emotion and said that hers and her institution is a home for those who are unseen, who are forgotten, who have been marginalized, who deal with their struggles in isolation. We're talking about mental health crises and that have suffered. This is an institution that has suffered because of the economic crisis. It's an institution that has suffered because of the war, because of the collapse, because of the Port of Beirut blast, and all the different pressures that have been on the Lebanese for the past 5 years. And you'd imagine an institution that deals with mental health would get more support. But it's been run by these nuns. And I think what struck the Lebanese was that the Pope brought what he can do, which is his spotlight on those who are forgotten, and saying, I see you. Another equally important is on the Port of Beirut blast survivors and victims. And the Pope went and made a point to go to the port images of the Pope going on his knees to a child, or blessing, those who have lost their most precious, the things that can never be returned, their loved ones. That sends a powerful image beyond politics. It sends a powerful image that really I don't think anyone else but a spiritual leader can do, and especially with his pulpit, that your struggle is a struggle I see and that deserves to be seen. And if you'll allow me, why I want to just end on this thought, and I know it's been a while, but the most powerful thing one would argue is that for so long, especially with the port, we have heard that this is a cause that can be compromised, that it is a story that can be forgotten, that their pursuit for justice and the truth is too difficult. And it speaks to this deeper problem of why I was so angry when I entered and why I left genuinely changed, because the message of the Pope was not to compromise on the truth. Right? Because his is a message of blessed are the peacemakers. And the message was that peace requires truth. It requires confronting the difficult work of peace. And I know we're going to be talking about that. But he gave a very powerful image, a powerful speech, a powerful trip that I would argue was more than just symbolic. It delivered a message to do the work needed for peace.
There's a lot in your answer there, and I actually do want to come back and try to pick up many of these themes. Before we do, though, Leo XIV, the first pope chosen from the United States, but he was also elected as the U.S. itself has been playing a more central role in shaping developments in the Middle East, much more so than it has in a long time, I think I would argue. And he just concluded his first visit to the Middle East. So, of course, both he and the Vatican, they've repeatedly stressed that, he's a Catholic pope. He's not an American pope. But, be that as it may, the connection is kind of hard to ignore. How did Leo's background shape perceptions and anticipations of his visit among Lebanon's population?
It's a great question. And what stood out, we're also living in an age of social media, and this is a pope that has also, not just in this trip, but has, throughout his early tenure, done an effort to speak about the epidemic of loneliness among the youth, of how do we engage the church in a digital age. And why I mention this is that a lot of this trip was all over social media. And he was, I would say, very camera friendly. And in one of the clips, towards the end of his trip, he is asked a question similar to what you're probing. And he said, there's what the Holy See can do, and there's what I can do. And not so much in that, in a much more diplomatic way. But the point is, yes, I think he is aware of the particular power of his own relationships as an American pope at a time of American, you know, great influence in the world and a willingness of America to engage in the world and to, bring peace. I think the message of peace today in the United States is very important in U.S. foreign policy. How it's pursued itself, there's a big debate about that. But the word peace is definitely something that resonates. And I have seen that in this trip. This is also the Pope's first trip upon taking office. And I would say it was a great success because it positioned the power of the Pope as an individual, as an American Pope, and the Holy See itself to be a shepherd and steward of peace.
Yeah, you actually mentioned this earlier. The visit to Lebanon carried the title Blessed are the Peacemakers, and this speaks directly to his emphasis on the Holy See's role in addressing major international conflicts. How did he seek to deliver this message in Lebanon itself?
I think one thing that really stood out was his speeches. And in his speeches, the Pope did not speak of peace in a hokey way. He did not speak in gimmicks that, Lebanon is a land of coexistence, the sort of gimmicks, and it pains me to say this, that have been forced, a discourse that has been forced on the Lebanese while they are living through catastrophe. They are living through daily uh, threats, daily aggressions, and the looming specter of war, all while there is this talk that everything is going well, that diplomacy is the way, that disarmament is on track, while the truth in front of them is anything but. And the Pope's speech was very clear about what peace is, that peace is work, whether it's in his mass or in his speech at the presidential office. What stood out to me was it requires, he used the word, a shift in mindset. And again, that language, I give my credit to the Pope, to his team, resonates with a lot of Lebanese because the threat of war today is very different than in the 90s. It's not necessarily today the context of a civil war that is looming. It is the question of, can the state succeed in holding a monopoly on force and in doing so having peaceful relations with its neighbors? Can it finally close this chapter? That's a very different thing. And it brings me back to, again, another powerful thing in the Pope's speech was it is work, it requires a shift in mindset, and it requires leadership to seize it. And I remember in the speech, I don't want to misquote the Pope, but he said peace is not just bottom up. It also requires courage, it requires leadership to do that work. And that really resonated. It resonated with the audience, and the proof of the pudding is not just me, but if you look at some of the major media outputs for your audience, right, that wants to look, the Pope was framed as an honest speaker.
Before we started recording, you had mentioned that as soon as Pope Leo's plane departed Beirut International Airport, Israeli military drones moved back in. And you thought this could have been a foreboding sign that war could soon resume. Um, what else have you been seeing that makes you think so? I mean, let's kind of articulate what we've been dancing around as to the situation that Lebanon finds itself in today.
Let's, put off my religious eyes and put on my scholar hat and focus on why I think the status quo is falling apart. I think that would be a great way to do it. Since November last, when the ceasefire was largely advanced by the United States and with the support of France, there was a major de-escalation of the conflict. I wouldn't say a full end of the conflict, but a major de-escalation. And the premise was the Lebanese would be responsible for disarming Hezbollah, while Israel would gradually withdraw from the hilltops it occupies and cease, its military operations. The other aspects have not happened. Israel has not withdrawn. The strikes haven't stopped. And equally important, Hezbollah has not been disarmed. In fact, intelligence that has been shared in the media, Israeli intelligence, suggests that, on the contrary, Hezbollah is regrouping. It is rearming. And what this sets up is we're essentially at a point where, on the one hand, the Lebanese government has focused, or rather, I should say the Lebanese state, because there are different elements in the government that have different positions, but the Lebanese state has so far emphasized disarming Hezbollah in the southern Litani. So for those who don't know, it's that key area between the de facto border and the Litani River. And Israel's security doctrine has radically changed, right? Those of you who may be familiar with the Southern Litani, that evokes images of 2006, right? Where there's a buffer zone. But Israel's doctrine has radically changed. Its red line is the full disarmament of Hezbollah, not the partial disarmament of Hezbollah. And why this is an untenable status quo is whether it is in the assassination of Hezbollah's chief military commander only around a week ago, or whether it's its strike against Iran's nuclear program months ago. Israel has demonstrated it is prepared to take the first strike to deal with any threat unresolved. What that strike looks like, however, moving forward, I don't think I can predict. I don't think anyone can predict. But what I would say is, if Lebanon does not show credible initiative, right, that it is prepared and it is willing and it has the capability to commit to fully disarming Hezbollah, unless it takes an initiative that restores that credibility, I do worry it will not be deciding that question of war and peace.
Now, on the other hand, on Wednesday, after significant cajoling from the United States, Lebanese and Israeli delegations met directly for talks that would be mediated by the U.S. envoy. Can we draw any conclusions yet from how that meeting went or its significance for reducing tensions in the Israeli-Lebanese relationship?
Here's how I would frame it. You started with this powerful image of drones coming as the Pope's plane leads. The day after the Pope's visit, though, we also do see a notable development, and that's worthwhile, where we do see civilian leadership, or civilian appointees, rather, being sent to engage. And the signal is potentially, does that mean, on the one hand, civilians playing a bigger role, civilian leadership playing a bigger role in that discussion? And two, right, is it broadening the space for something larger? But here's, where I'd like to caution is the proof is always in the pudding. And the pudding has been, well, I don't know how to go on with that expression, rather bitter so far and disappointing.
Switching gears just a little bit, how did the trip reflect the Vatican's approach to interfaith relations as well as dialogue within Christian communities in the region?
I do think the trip as a whole speaks and demonstrates to several things. One is we do see a continuation from the Holy See to reconcile between Christian communities their relationship. And there is an emphasis on restoring those relationships. And we saw some powerful scenes in Turkey, especially, of this effort of Christian leadership from different denominations to come together, to pray together, even if there are some, theological disagreements. I don't want to get too much. I know that's not maybe the Middle East Institute's, particular focus, but that was notable. And in Lebanon, we did see powerful images of working alongside, talking alongside, symbolic acts with Druze, different Muslim communities, Sunni, Shia representatives. It was a powerful scene, and I think it speaks to an intention and an effort to reconcile differences, to work together, and to put interfaith dialogue and the language of peace at the heart of his mission.
Yeah, one of those papal stops I want to focus us on is the Pope celebrated Mass at the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Lebanon in Harissa. And this is a site where both Christian and Muslim faithful come to pay homage to Mary, the biblical mother of Jesus. And the Pope explicitly referred to it as, quote, a symbol of unity for the entire Lebanese people. And of course, as many know, Lebanon has a painful history of bloody sectarian civil war. But to what degree do you think the country has moved past this difficult legacy in 2025?
It's a powerful image, and I think it also, whether it is, Harissa itself, whether it's the different symbols that connect our different faiths, our different communities, our own history, I do think the country has moved remarkably away since, the 90s after the aftermath of the Civil War. And I would go so far to say the threat to peace today is not about civil war in the sense of religious communities or weaponized sectarian identities fighting together. That narrative needs to shift. And I do give credit to the Pope for not tapping into that, outdated gimmick. Even when he spoke, because what I really like about your question of what are the challenges to Lebanon today, he went out of his way to talk about youth, about encouraging the youth to stay in Lebanon, but not in a way of throwing them under the bus, recognizing why youth are leaving the country, that there is something broken. And it requires leadership to fix what it is broken. And it is, again, a state that has been coerced into failure, an economy that has been coerced into failure, and that cannot succeed unless there is a legitimate state and a leadership committed to that state project. And that's quite powerful. And if you allow me just to finish this thought, because it really speaks to another question that was underlying of, and maybe we can talk about it, what can the Holy See do apart from drawing attention? He was asked a question about receiving a letter from Hezbollah. And he was quite open by saying Hezbollah should disarm. Again, I'm not going to misquote him. And he preferred not to comment further. I think that is powerful. I think it is powerful because it is saying that the way forward is for the state to be a credible state, to hold a monopoly on force. But what also stood out was that the Pope would not be an instrument for equivocation.
So we're also coming on, fast approaching the 1 year of the new government in Lebanon. Has Prime Minister Nawaf Salam's cabinet, has it emphasized policies to encourage greater national unity, and how successful have those been to date?
I will caution you, Matt, there's no word more dangerous in Lebanon than national unity, because national unity has often been a euphemism for Hezbollah to coerce and to advance its agenda, even when it is in the political minority. That means when it does not hold a majority in parliament. And so that force through violence, so-called national unity governments that were anything but national unity governments. They were terms of acquiescence. But I get the spirit of your question of what has this government done in terms of achievements? And again, to answer your question, I would say not enough. I think they have taken courageous steps, and it's important to recognize them. I do think disarming significant parts of the southern Litani are notable, right? That is an important development. It does prevent a, so far, October 7th style attack. So there is a logic behind it, right? The government has taken efforts to, it claims, as best as it can, to bring in the language and shift the language of its legitimacy, that it should hold a monopoly on force, that it should bring an end to the economic crisis. We did see, and it's not here just the government, but again, when we speak of the state as a whole, we did see a new central bank governor. So there have been important steps, but they are nowhere near enough. Let's keep it within this context of the Pope's visit. This is a country in 2025 that does not have functioning electricity. This is inexcusable. This is a country that until before the Pope's visit, roads are nowhere near that of what they should be. This is a country where, there is no justice for the victims of the port of Beirut blast. There is still obstruction towards its local investigation and no confidence. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking if there was one thing I could tell the Pope during his visit at the port of Beirut was, could you just get the answer to one question? When? When will our leadership ensure that there is no obstruction for an inquiry into the Port of Beirut blast? When will the government ensure that the threat of war will not hang over us, because they can clearly tell us when they plan to disarm Hezbollah? These are Lebanese demands. They are not just American demands. America, I do think, is a partner. It cares about the state project, but it comes back to this notion of the initiative must come from Lebanon's leadership, and that is missing still, unfortunately.
I'm glad you brought up the Port of Beirut explosion again, because that's actually where I wanted to go to next. It does raise the question of to what degree moral and spiritual leadership could be effective in spotlighting areas essentially where political leadership has fallen short or failed. But do you think that the visit by Pope Leo, his visit to the site, his prayer there, the way he brought the issue back to the forefront for so many people, do you think that will have a lasting impact to draw attention to the human consequences of this explosion, the continued struggle for both accountability and recovery?
Thank you, Matt. I can't think of anything, often when we speak about great geopolitics, we often forget the personal. And I can't think of anything more powerful than, I hope, some degree of peace of heart and healing that goes to the victims, to survivors, to the grieving, that your grief is heard, that you are not left alone in the shadows, that you are not going to be forgotten. That is powerful, because what is so painful to many who care about the families, who care about the injustice, is that there has been a systematic effort to silence, to invisibilize Lebanese grief and Lebanese pain, whether it is the Port of Beirut blast victims or whether it is the far, in terms of more multiple victims of the economic crisis. They have been invisibilized. And why I want to go back to those two stops that really resonated not just with me, with the Lebanese of Deir es-Salib and the Port of Beirut blast. It is a message that the Holy See sends to the Lebanese that your struggle will not be forgotten. The question that should be asked is, given this remarkable goodwill, the remarkable international goodwill for Lebanon that always blows me away, it genuinely does, how many people want Lebanon to succeed? I mean, it is so powerful. The Pope's first trip, and he goes to Lebanon in a time of conflict. That's a remarkable thing. And the question is, what will Lebanon's leadership do with this momentum? Can it stop war from coming? Because war is a terrible thing. It is terrible, and no one knows that more than the Lebanese. And there is a responsibility on the Lebanese president, on the Lebanese government, to protect its people from this conflict. There is also a responsibility on this government, you're right to say 1 year in, to give answers as to why those solutions have not happened. What are their plans for accountability? And again, I cannot underestimate or undersell how devastating the economic crisis has been to the project of Lebanon. If you are an ordinary person, the job of the state is to ensure you can have a life where you succeed with dignity. And today, to answer your question bluntly, why the answer is always disappointing is because Lebanon cannot promise its own people they can have a life with dignity.
The third major theme of Pope Leo's visit was focused on the youth. And this obviously reflects the importance of the next generation, not just for the church itself, but for the future of the wider region as well. You've alluded to this a little bit previously, but I wanted to draw you out on it a little bit more. So what was the Pope's central message to young Lebanese?
The Pope has, again, what I would keep stressing in this trip. We're starting to, for our Holy See watchers who are interested in the politics of the Holy See, not just of the Middle East, we're starting to see a bit more about who Pope Leo is and what he envisions for his papacy and the Holy See's foreign policy. And something that he has said time and again is that the youth are not just the future, they are the present. Those are his words. And that is powerful, that you have a role to shape the course of your life. It's a powerful thing, and it speaks whether we're in Lebanon, whether we're in the United States, whether we're in the Middle East, that I want to again emphasize to our audience beyond the Levant, beyond Lebanon. This is a very young region, that you matter, you are important, and we need to include you in shaping our own course as a church. He often speaks of the Christians of the Levant, to use his terms, that you have a role to play. But what keeps coming back is this isn't a naivete. This isn't an effort to manipulate the youth, and he did a special event just for the youth in Lebanon. It is that our leadership, the country, must deal with the systemic failures that are forcing youth to leave. Because that's not a fair burden to throw on the youth, because they're thinking about ordinary decisions. Can I have a career in Lebanon? Can I have a family if I don't have a career? These are very valid questions. They're questions many Lebanese struggle with. And I think the Pope helped put a spotlight on that humanity.
And how do you think that was received by Lebanon's up-and-coming generations?
I would say that the Pope's trip was a remarkable success. It was a remarkable success for him, for the Holy See. And I know this conversation has touched a bit on the emotional. And I always try as a scholar to be dispassionate. But whenever we talk about religion, emotions are very important. And why I mention this is a pope who is very intelligent. He is very knowledgeable about the persona that he brings, the image he brings. And he uses emotion, I found, in an effective way. Because today, I would say, the message of peace, the message of youth being at the center of peace. He also spoke about woman and the centrality of woman and the durability of peace. This was very well received. And it was not, I will keep stressing this, about his words alone. It was about his actions to go beyond the curated image that has been so stifling to the youth, that has been so stifling to most Lebanese, right, who are being told nothing really, that you are in the dark. You are in the dark as the choices that affect your life. And again, for our audience, some, I imagine, who are listening today are not Lebanese, that existential decisions over the economy, over war and peace, that you are not part of that. And this is someone who is at one of the highest seats, going out of his way to tell you, I see you, and I will ensure that you are seen to my best ability. And that's a powerful message.
2025, we saw waves of these mass youth protests around the world, from Nepal to Morocco to Madagascar, Kenya, a few other places as well. Lebanon is not on this list. And I don't want to say there's any one particular reason why Lebanese youth did not take to the streets in the same way that Moroccans did, for example. But I kind of wanted to see if you want to get into maybe why Lebanese youth did not voice their protests in the same way. I mean, how do they see their role in society in contributing to improving the domestic political scene or the economic future of the country?
So I'm a professor, and it pains me to say, I guess I'm no longer youth. I used to take pride in being a youth.
I did not want to phrase this question in a way that makes it sound like you and I are not young men anymore.
Yeah. But I would say in Lebanon, its youth have been pioneers in shaping change. I think they were a key actor in the 2019 popular uprisings. But they also are a remarkably adaptive, skilled, politically cogent youth who, when the uprisings were again coerced into failure, they were attacked, they were beaten, Lebanese youth adapted. And they were key engineers in shaping the growth of what would become anti-establishment politics. So we would see the formalization of political parties, and then we saw, the parliamentary elections, a group of independents break through. That wouldn't have been possible if it were not for youth. So what I would tell you is that youth have been adaptive, but they have learned that protests in of themselves have shortcomings in Lebanon's context. That doesn't take away from disillusionment. It is there. It is real. And the last elections, especially in Beirut, did show something, that we shouldn't romanticize youth either. We did see low youth turnout in certain parts in Lebanon, and that's important. So I would say youth are a dynamic, diverse political group in Lebanon. I do think an organized segment of this larger group will play a role in the next elections. The question, and it comes down to Lebanon's leadership. And if you'll allow me to just tap back into it, how do you engage the youth? Youth are not naive. They are making powerful choices, difficult choices. Do I stay? Do I stay with my family, with my elder parents who have been hard hit by the banking crisis? These are real decisions, questions my students struggle with, and I see them struggling with them. And it is the responsibility of Lebanon's new leadership to offer them a convincing and credible vision and the will to act on that vision, that there is a project for Lebanon worthwhile, that it will succeed. And today, 1 year back to your question of has the president, has the prime minister, has the government delivered that vision? No. Has it restored that confidence? No. And it's not me you should be convinced by. It is the evidence. People vote with their feet, and they are leaving Lebanon. They continue to leave Lebanon and not return, not out of a lack of love, but because these are difficult choices that they no longer have trust that Lebanon's leaders, its government, can deliver what's needed, which is a state project that can protect and preserve their dignity.
Nick, we've already covered a great deal. But just to sum up, do you have any final thoughts on what did the papal visit achieve? Where is Lebanon headed? What else do you want our audience to take away from this conversation?
Well, first, I would say if there is anyone in the Holy See listening, I genuinely am extending my thanks to the Holy Father, because I know people say it all the time, and I hope you'll excuse this small, fragile moment of vulnerability. But that brief encounter did change me. It did make me feel seen and restored a sense of optimism. So to the heart of your question, was this trip a success? If you look at an individual level, I would like to think a lot of people were changed and moved by his visit, and I genuinely am grateful for that. The second thing that I say that we should end this is, where do we go from here? The Pope did hint that his office could play a role in mediation, and is and has played a role in discussing the importance of peace, of dialogue, and putting down weapons. So it does bring to this question of, can the Holy See play a constructive role in moving the dialogue forward, but to follow the Pope's own words, not in peace being a euphemism for arranging the status quo in a way that allows its dysfunction to continue, but doing the hard work that peace needs for it to be durable and to succeed, and hopefully give Lebanon the chance it needs, because it is a message that is worthwhile.
Well, Nick, I think we'll have to wrap it up there. That's all the time we have for this week. Thanks so much for joining me on the program today.
Thank you.
And a warm thanks also goes out to our listeners for tuning in, as well as to our great production team for all of their work on this week's episode. To find MEI's latest coverage of Lebanon, please visit our website, www.mei.edu. If you enjoy our weekly conversations with Middle East experts, please consider subscribing to this podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. And you can also follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I'm Matthew Czekaj, and I hope you'll listen in again next week.